Guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm an immigrant entrepreneur, zero generation. I was born in Ukraine. I lived for a little bit in Israel, and I came to America about 20 years ago. I started multiple businesses, but I want to talk about my path to where I started the business. And maybe you can learn something from this. So my channel is targeted for immigrant entrepreneurs who want to start a business or building a business, and will find my experience and my advice and my also me sharing my successes and failures valuable. So I want to talk to you about why and how I started the business. So I came here as a young man. I was 21 years old. I went to college. I studied computer science and engineering just by background. My background is Russian. All my family, some kind of sort of engineers or architects, numbers people, software engineers, and I can just follow that path. When you're 21 years old, you don't really know what you want to be. So I just kind of followed the default mode of my parents, everybody I knew. I never knew anyone who was an entrepreneur. The only person kind of was closest to this was my grandfather, who I was very close with. And I saw him kind of like get things done in the former Soviet Union. That's where I was born. I was born actually in Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union. But he was so good with people. He was so, in a good way, he was so smooth, so polite, very likable, very trustworthy. Just people came to him and asked him for advice on different, family situation, business situations, work situations. He would just advise them. So I would sit in his living room, and I would see like unending stream of people coming once or twice per day, on the weekends even more, and asking him for advice, for help. And he would help them with connections. He would help them with advice. He would help them, maybe, he knew some guy with money, other guy needed money. He kind of connected them. Some guy had experience. Some guy needed to learn from that experience. He would also connect them. He was a simple history teacher, but he was actually, in fact, much more than that. So one of the reasons I started this channel is to honor my grandfather, who was kind of an inspiration for me. Even though he passed away 10 years ago at the age of 93. I still miss him daily. And I started this channel in part to give back, and honor his memory. My channel is basically geared towards entrepreneurs, immigrant entrepreneurs, and that's who I am. That's who I identify as. And my goal is to give you, for you guys to learn from my successes and failures, and hopefully make your life easier, more abundant, and not repeat the same mistakes that I've made. So I want to talk a little bit about how I started being an entrepreneur. Basically what led me to this choice. So as I said, I grew up not knowing anyone who was an entrepreneur, and I basically, to me, it was a foreign word. In Russia, everybody was an employee. They had the same salary. We're talking about the Soviet Union, so we're going back 35 years ago. When I was a kid, everybody had a salary. Everybody had a job. I did not know any entrepreneurs. Actually, private enterprise was forbidden, so you could not open your own company even if you wanted. There was a lot of like black market stuff under the table going on, people finding things, selling them, but it was kind of like, I don't want to say it's really illegal, but it was extremely uncommon, So the kind of big breakthrough was actually when I was 9 years old. So it was my last year in Russia. When I love to read, I'm just a voracious reader. I learned how to read when I was 5, and probably I just started reading nonstop. Anything I could get my hands on, kids books, adventures, science, history, anything. I would read probably like, finish a book a week, maybe even 2 books a week. And I came across, actually I went to the library, and there I came across a book. It was by unknown, probably to you, American writer, actually. His name was Theodore Dreiser. And he wrote kind of a series of 3 books, a trilogy, about a kind of man from low means, like very simple background, coming and building a business in the age of railroads. That's what America was going through, its first industrial boom. And he built this business from scratch. It talks about in depth about his personal struggles, how he started, how he failed many times, and how he eventually succeeded. And that book really blew my mind. I said, like, I don't know anyone who's even similar to this guy, but I want to be this guy. So when I was 9 years old, I chose my, I would say, profession or calling without knowing anyone who was an entrepreneur. It just reading a book. It's kind of strange to say this, but I think my destiny was decided when I was 9 years old. And it's funny because I gave, the librarian who recommended me this book, the whole goal in Russia was to, in the Soviet Union, was to discourage people from kind of, personal initiative and follow the party line, communist party line, and just rah rah, believe in Lenin, believe in, in the Communist Party and everything they taught us. And one of the ways they would show it to us, they would tell us how terrible America was, and how rough capitalism was, and how many unemployed and homeless people were in America. It sounds funny, but nowadays, but that's how it was back then. So when a librarian gave me this book, one of the things she asked me, she goes, "So how do you like those capitalists? It's a rough world out there, right? It's a jungle, the way they live, right? This book talks about it." And I kind of looked at her. I was a kid again. I didn't know I was supposed to hide information. I told her, I kind of like that actually, Miss Ivanova. And it was the last name Ivanova. I like this character, and I kind of want to be like him. So her eyes opened in horror. She told me, "You want to be a capitalist? I need to talk to your parents. Something is wrong with your kid." So basically, she talked to my parents. She was like, "Listen, your son is reading a book about capitalism. He seems to like it. So you take care of your son. Really watch out for him. He might be on a dangerous path here." So that's how kind of I fell in love with this idea of being a businessman. Even I didn't know anyone who was a businessman besides kind of my grandfather, who was kind of a pseudo businessman, but just by helping people, maybe trading favors, maybe bartering items. I saw many times, you would receive a present from somebody. Let's say in Russia, what was really valuable was food was really valuable, like expensive luxury food. I would say caviar or some kind of like rare meats or a bottle of wine. So you would get as a thank you present for helping connect people. He would get like a box of caviar, okay, bottle of caviar, right? And he would give it to somebody in exchange for like a fur coat. So I saw him constantly, like people coming to our house. I lived with him in the summers, and would give him things, and then somebody else would come there and would exchange those things for other things of high value. So I was like in awe of my grandfather, how he did it. And I would say probably, that kind of inspired me also. Long story short, I made my way to Israel. Israel was a definitely, much more open country than Russia, but it was not a capitalist country. I don't know if you guys know anything about Israel. It's a small country. A lot in the news, unfortunately, not good news. But it's a small country back then it was 5 or 6 million people. Now it's up to 9. So I came to Israel when I was 10, right? And it was like kind of a socialist country. Some people were trying to do business, but I never met anyone kind of doing business on scale, And people like, selling clothes in stores, a couple got, maybe coffee shop, kind of, I just observed them, but I could not connect to that type of business. And I kind of just by talking to different people, like one of my kind of innate traits is curiosity about people. I think I inherited from my grandfather. And I would always talk to people, learn about different things, ask them different questions, like pester them with questions. I'm very curious. So how do you run this business? How do you buy your tomatoes? Where do you sell them? What do you find them? What does it cost you? So people would just answer those questions, for me, and I kind of learn this way about different businesses, So my mom would go shopping at the fruit market, and I would spend time talking to different vendors there, fruits and vegetables. Same thing in the coffee shop, same thing in the bakery, same thing in clothing shop, and everything. But as I mentioned, Israel is a small country. So by the time I was a teenager, kind of like 16, 17, I realized that Israel is kind of a small country. You really have to know people and be connected to the, like really wealthy family or connected families who are maybe like, I think back when I was growing up, I think something like 7% owned, 60% of the Israeli families, just seven families, right? Very powerful, connected families owned a huge chunk of Israeli GDP. Back then. Now I think it's more diversified, but I wouldn't be surprised. It's a very concentrated ownership of few people owning big chunks of the economy. So I kind of realized that Israel was too small for me. I'm saying it like not in terms of ego-driven comment, but basically I realized that basically Israel is driven by who you know instead of what you could do. And I decided to kind of to make it to America. To me, America was always a land of opportunity. And it's where big things happen. That's where they got the movies, got Wall Street. Back then they had the whole internet thing going on. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. I would look at them like people would look at Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, or Pele. So Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, the business people, what they represented back in the 90s were my heroes. I would read in the newspapers about what they do. So I was very inspired. So when I came to America, I went to college, and the first thing I did, I would go to the library and I would just read Wall Street Journal. I mean, to me, it was like it would read like the novel. I could not understand probably 80% of what was said there. First of all, I did not speak English, but and second of all, the business terms, I could not understand what they meant. But I would just started going day after day, and I would like look at certain charts. I would see like charts of stocks, chart of currencies, pick up different words, look them up in a dictionary. Back then, you could not Google, so I would use dictionary, and little probably within a year or two, I could kind of go through Wall Street Journal and understand probably 60-70% of that. Of the lingo. I was also studying accounting and finance, so it kind of went line in line with what I was doing. So my business kind of interest in business really intensified. So I studied finance and computer science just to kind of honor my family and so they don't disown me, and finance because I loved that. That was my passion. And then kind of I graduated. I was 23, 24 years old when I graduated, and I kind of just like tried to find myself. And I think it's every entrepreneur goes through this, trying to find himself. He tries that, tries this. I tried multiple jobs. I was a real estate agent. I was a sales clerk. I was a personal assistant. Um, until I was even a banker. I worked as a teller in the bank. I was an analyst in the bank until I found one guy who kind of just a random guy. I was back then. I was a real estate agent, and I worked in the office with a real estate agent selling condos. Helping them. I was not really selling them. I was like an assistant to an agent. Right? So I was 24, 25 years old, assistant to an agent. A lot of my friends went to get like cool jobs in a bank or in consulting or some web design or programming, and I kind of like just like stayed in this messy middle, just trying to find myself. So, and when we would get together with my classmates to grab a beer, there was like, Alex, you still doing that stupid job of yours? I'm like, yeah, still that stupid job. So until I met in the office, I met this one guy who, who just would sit by himself. It was kind of like an agent, but like you would had his own office. He would come in and go, and I was very curious about it, right? Speaking of curiosity. So one day I knew his name. I said, Bruce, do you mind if I talk to you for a minute? He said, sure. What's up? I said, listen, I see you coming and going, but I don't see you kind of like going to show houses or to show condos. Like, what's your story? What do you do? So he says, I am not a residential real estate agent. I am a commercial real estate agent, and I sell very specific type of real estate. Not only I sell it, I also buy it on my own account. So my eyes lit up, and I said, like, wow, what does it mean, commercial real estate? Well, he goes, it's all of the stuff. It's not residential. It's not homes. It's office buildings. It's industrial warehouses. It's apartments. It's shopping malls. But it's not what I do. He told me. He says I do a very unique niche in commercial real estate called self storage. I never heard of such thing of what is self storage. I never used it. But I said, like, what is it? He goes, well, when people move, and they have to kind of put their stuff somewhere, until they move to a new place, or somebody, let's say, go downsizes from a big house to a small house, and they need to put their stuff somewhere just to keep it, or somebody's opening a business and need to store stuff somewhere. So that's self-storage. I was like, that sounds interesting. And he said, do you mind if I'm in the office here every day, I have a couple of hours every day, and do you mind if I maybe sit down and ask you a few questions? He goes, sure. So it's kind of like, evolved into this kind of, I would say, friendship. And eventually I asked him for a job, and I said to him, listen, I work in commission. What if I helped you and I kind of get to learn what you know? I accompany you everywhere you go, and it's gonna be free. I don't need to get paid. I think you'll pay me with your knowledge and experience, but I only ask that they expose me to as much stuff as possible. So he kind of looked at me. He goes, really? You want to work for free? What are you, dummy? He laughed. I said, no, Bruce, I just want to learn. So he said, fine. Says I said to me, I like the word free. You got me at free. And that's how it started. I worked for him for free. He said, Alex, you'll do anything, right? I said, anything you want. I just want to learn. He says, well, he drove me to, took me in his car, fancy car, BMW. I was like, this guy drives a BMW. That's nice. Okay. I like that style. And so he dropped me off around the corner, kind of drove to some property, which looked like a self-storage, which is like many small units. He dropped me off. He had the keys to the property. It was his property. He had said hello to the manager, and he opened a couple of units, and they were like full of crap, just like old stuff, some dirty, some God knows clothes, papers, broken furniture. He goes, Alex, you said you want to help me, right? I was like, yeah. He says, why don't you clean those units? You gave me like maybe 10 units to clean. So I told him I'm going to do anything. So I cleaned those units, and I did anything for him. Like he wanted me to pay bills, to print things out, clean units, clean toilets, prepare spreadsheets for him, which I was very good at. Prepare PowerPoint presentations for you know, for his investors or reports. I would do anything. So it would be like from cleaning the units, cleaning the office, preparing anything he basically needed. So I became kind of his assistant. But in the meantime, I was exposed to a lot of important stuff, kind of understanding how self-storage operates, how do you find clients, how to analyze performance, how to do a P&L, profit and loss statement. So to me, even though I didn't know it in hindsight, I was getting a lot more. I was actually ultimately I was getting the better side of the deal, because I knew that what I was doing back then. I decided, because many times I would come home and I would say like, what are you doing? All your friends are working, in consulting, and they drive fancy cars, and they've got girlfriends who respect them, and you can't even show it to a school reunion because what do you tell them? You're cleaning storage units. So it was a little embarrassing for a couple of years, and I would say to all entrepreneurs out there, like embarrassment, ego, just throw it out the window. You'll do what it takes to learn a job and to learn a certain profession, to learn a certain business, and that's what helped me, this kind of attitude. I'll do anything as long as I'm learning. And long story short, I worked for Bruce for about a year for free. I learned a ton. I learned how to buy self-storage, how to sell it, how to analyze it, how to maintain it, how to clean it, how to fix it if something breaks. Even how to build it, because you would buy some properties and it would build units there. So after a year, I told him, Bruce, I really thank you for the opportunity. I learned a ton. So I think it's time for me to move on. So he said, Alex, you helped me a lot. I really appreciate it. So anything you need, just call me. And I told him, Bruce, listen, I have just one request from you. Just remember me. My goal is to be you. And in a few years, right? So I want to, if you think that there'll be an opportunity for me to get into this business in some shape or form, just let me know, okay? And we parted ways. He hugged me, I thanked him for everything, and that's kind of how I ended my self-storage job. So I will end my recording here. I think you'll find it interesting because the next chapter would be what I actually done with this job. Okay, so if you like this channel, last time I had a whole of 13 views, so my goal is to get 2,000 subscribers in 2026. So hopefully you're going to be one of them. If you find it useful and you're and a theme of being immigrant and entrepreneurship is talking to you, relevant to you, subscribe to my channel. There's going to be a lot more material here. Take care.